Namaste, Dr. Sharma.
Namaste, Vanessa.
I have been reading some books on Hinduism after my most recent trip to India. And these books always referred to untouchability as an intrinsic part of Hinduism. I can understand when someone may not want to touch somebody when one has a flu infection, when one has to shake hands with somebody you don't like and you refuse to. I can understand this, but I can't understand when some people should be treated permanently untouchable. What do you have to say of what do you say about this?
Yeah. Okay, we should distinguish here between two statements. Whether untouchability has been a part of Hinduism and whether untouchability is an intrinsic part of Hinduism. Whether untouchability has been a part of Hinduism and why, and whether untouchability is an intrinsic part of Hinduism and why. So, I think it is true that untouchability has been a part of Hinduism. Sometimes an effort is made to dilute this point by well-wishers of Hinduism, both Hindu and non-Hindu, by saying that Hinduism may have had untouchability, but it did not have slavery of the kind we find in the West. It has not had genocide of the kind and on the scale we have found in other cultures, and so on. And that's interesting. Sometimes people say there is also untouchability in Hinduism after you have performed the funeral rites of somebody. I remember when I performed the funeral rites of my sister, who unfortunately passed away when she was barely 10, I was untouchable in my own house. These are interesting points, but one has to accept the fact that untouchability of the kind you describe, that some people have been permanently designated untouchables, has been a part of Hinduism. But when it is claimed that it is an intrinsic part of Hinduism, then a problem arises. If something is an intrinsic part of something, then that means that that particular quality must always be a part of the substance of the thing. So we have to ask, has untouchability always been a part of Hinduism? Or is it a part of Hinduism? Now we know that in the Vedic period, there is very little evidence of untouchability as we know it. So the whole period of Hindu history, which is called the Vedic and the pre-Vedic period, part of the pre-Vedic period is the Harappan culture. We don't know enough about it. But that part of it which we know about, the Vedic, cannot be associated with the kind of untouchability we have in mind when we talk about it now. Similarly, Hinduism has not been confined to India. It has also spread, at least in the past, it has spread to East Asia. Bali, we are told, in Indonesia is still Hindu. Bali does not have untouchability. So if Hinduism and untouchability are intrinsically related, then it should also be found in Bali. Much later, Hinduism went from India to Fiji and Trinidad and so on. Even there we don't find untouchability anymore. So you have to keep this in mind. And then in modern times, untouchability has been abolished in India constitutionally. I am not saying that no traces of it are to be found in Indian society. But at least it has been now laid down that normatively it is not a part of Hinduism. But we continue to be Hindus. I am a post-constitutional Hindu. The Constitution was adopted in 1950, but it is illegal for me to practice untouchability. So these are the various aspects we have to consider when discussing untouchability.
But how can you say it's not connected with Hinduism when it is connected with karma?
Good question. First, let me talk about the connection between karma and the so-called caste system itself. And then we will go into some fine points of this issue. The doctrine of karma and rebirth, according to modern scholars, appears later in the history of Vedic society than the doctrine of the Varnas or the four classes. You get my point? So that the connection which was made between karma and caste, quote unquote, was forged later. It is not intrinsic, because you first have the description of the Varnas already in the Rig Veda and the early Brahmanas. And then you have the doctrine of the rebirth clearly spelled out, rather unambiguously spelled out, according to most scholars, in the part of the Upanishads. So there is a time lag here. However, it is true that in classical Hinduism, karma and varna and jati and untouchability were connected karmically. Now, if we make the karmic connection, then the question arises, is karma static or dynamic? That is to say, have I the ability to change my karma? It is true that you have been born in Mexico and a woman and somebody interested in Hinduism because of your karma. And I have been Indian and I have my background in religious studies because of my karma. But does it mean that we are bound to it? We cannot change it? Can you not become interested in Islam or Judaism and learn Hebrew or Arabic? So any link which is forged cannot be deterministic. You can say that a person has been born and untouchable because of his bad karma. But that he should remain an untouchable is carrying the doctrine too far. But you might say that such was the case. Such indeed was the case in the past. The person could not free himself. Then it would be possible to say, let's see what happens when you grab the wrong end of the stick. The stick here being the doctrine of karma. Do you know what Mahatma Gandhi said when he was turned back by a barber in South Africa who refused to cut his hair because he was black? He said, this is the karmic consequence of we being victims of untouchability. Here is the karmic consequence of our victimizing others. So the doctrine of karma is a double-edged sword. And if you grasp it at the wrong end, then you get hurt. Some people would argue that the way the Hindus were treated under foreign rule in India for a very long period of time was similar to the way they themselves had been treating the untouchables, and that this was their karmic comeuppance. So yes, you can apply the doctrine of karma, but you can also misapply it with disastrous consequences.